I feel I've reinvented myself a couple of times already, but about 10 years ago, I made the shift to the workplace industry. It was out of coincidence and out of serendipity, but I was an engineer. I worked and lived in a lot of different countries. But when I landed in Silicon Valley, I fell in love with this mentality of making the world a better place, changing the world, disrupting all the industries. I was meeting people who loved their job, who were loving their company, who loved working, and it was actually very original. Like I've lived and worked in about 10 countries by that time, and I've never found this like relationship, like this healthy relationship with work and with an employer. And so I became so passionate about this that through networking, I found out about the workplace industry. And so I joined the workplace team at Stripe, and I started designing and building offices all around the world. And my goal, my personal goal was that by building amazing offices outside of Silicon Valley, we were also bringing a little bit of that mindset that work shouldn't hurt, work shouldn't be a suffering, that you should love what you do, that you should aim to make the world a better place through your work. And so I became very, very driven by this. And then the pandemic hit. I had just left Stripe. And suddenly, it also fell on me that a lot of companies were coming to me for advice, for consulting, for designing a new North Star, for thinking about the new ways of working. And so I started advising company. I launched my podcast. I got recognized by a lot of different places as an influential voice, like advocating for the future of work. And recently I joined Density, which is a team that I love, and we very aligned on our goals. We really want to make the world a better place through designing better cities, better building, better workplaces, and so that's where I fit today.
So doing that, is that through technology mostly with Density, like IoT?
So Density, they offer workplace technology, or basically it's a technology that can be used in any building, any space, that gives you data. And from that data, you can draw conclusion, you identify patterns or trends. And that's something that was cruelly missing before. I remember at Stripe when we were designing offices, we had very little feedback on our design, on our choices, on the progression of the utilization of the space. And so we were designing almost in the dark. And that's where already when I was at Stripe about 4 years ago, I started playing with technology, and Density was one of my vendors, to understand what can we do with technology? How can technology can fill this hole that we have to do things better, to understand how we can reallocate space and maybe change a different amenity, keeping up with the new trends that employees are used to access at their local coffee shop, at the co-working space, at the airport. We don't live in a siloed environment. We actually live in an interconnected ecosystem. And so there are trends, the same way there are trends in hospitality, in restaurants, in coffee shop. Our workplaces need to stay aligned with what is up and coming, what people want, what are people doing. We're talking a lot about the creators movement. And so those creators, they need a podcast recording studio, they need a photography studio. Our workplaces should deliver on this if they want to empower those creators to continue nourishing their audience. So that's kind of like this trend that we were missing with our technology, and where technology can really give us data and insight so we can continue iterate and build better.
Yeah, I love that you use the word like the workplace or the workplace environment should empower the people who are there. So can you give some examples more? Like you mentioned the creator economy and like the enabling creativity. Could you give some more examples on empowering the people with the
sure. One striking example is that even before the pandemic, we knew that a lot of people were not spending time at their desk because they could do work from home, they could do work from anywhere. But when they were coming to the office, that was for like socializing, collaborating, innovating. And yet they had very little space because desks were taking so much of our square footage. And so we were already witnessing that people couldn't really control their environment. They were coming to an experience that was already pre-designed, in which they could bring no changes. So that's very much a model that we want to move away from. We want to give control to employees. We want to allow them to book a space beforehand. We want them to move furniture and rearrange the space the same way that they do at their home. That's the piece that was missing. Somehow employees never felt that workplaces were designed for them. They never felt that they were owning their experience in the workplace. They were just coming to an experience that was pre-designed for them, in which they could bring no change. That's very much what is changing in the future.
I feel maybe some employers are a bit scared to sort of let go and lose control. What is your experience with that?
This is a real anxiety from employers. And I think we have to be gentle about it. I think, like, obviously it's our human nature, it's our human instinct to stay in the comfort zone. That's where we feel safe, and we're social animals. So we're looking for like a safe place, a safe environment, a safe network around us. And so obviously at a time of change, there will be resistance, because also none of us know what the future will hold. However, coming from Silicon Valley, I'm really convinced that we need to shape the future. It's not gonna design itself. Like, other people will curate what you look like. So even though we have fear, and even though some employers are not sure that the future will be better than the past, I think we need to embrace what is happening. There's no going back to what we had. A lot of people have established a new routine in the last 2 years. And we need to understand that people are different. They've been living through something very traumatic over the last 2 years. And the goal is not that we just forget. The goal is that, okay, we learn how to bring in these changes in how we socialize, how we interact, how we work into the workplaces, because again, the workplaces are here to support employees.
Speaking of this, it's like a new area of work almost, like workplace innovation, right? I think you were the first workplace innovation lead. Is that your title with Density?
It's my recent title. And it's one of this like silver lining of the pandemic is that there's a blossoming of new titles. So
yeah, I love that.
I was head of workplace transformation. Now I'm workplace innovation lead. Some people call me a leader in remote work. So all of these titles are very fluid now, which is healthy. I think for a long time we were stuck in these buckets. And yet, like, they were not really defining exactly the work that we were doing. Because, for instance, commercial real estate and workplace teams were doing a lot of culture and people, and yet, like, those teams were they were reporting to different buckets within organization. Now we're able to like acknowledge the strong link that there is between people and places. And this is why by merging, we're seeing a lot of different titles, which I find fascinating. And I also encourage, because we need to write new job description. We need to come up with new titles, because we need different leaders to create that future of work. And those titles, they bring a certain idea. When you have a head of people in remote work, you understand right then that this company allows for remote workers. So that was the case before the pandemic. For instance, no one was responsible for the experience of remote workers because they were not in the workplace. They were not under the umbrella of workplace and real estate teams. And because they were already employees, but they were not going through any employee milestone, they were not under the people team. So that's one example of people who were in between the cracks and they were not being served to the potential that they could be served. So that's what we're trying to break today. Like, if we were to merge these two teams, and the IT component is big also, so IT technology is big, but we're seeing a lot of companies who are trying to merge people and places to make sure that each and every one employee, even before they become an employee, so when they are at the level of a candidate, after being an employee, when they're like an alumni, is being covered. And this is why I really love, for instance, at Atlassian, they decided to rebrand their team Workplace Journeys, to show that our job as people and workplace team is to really cover the journey of an employee and make sure that at every moment, any given time, they know where to access the information, they know what experience they're going to live, they can provide feedback. And so that's what I'm seeing. I really encourage this fusion. It's going to make massive people team or massive people and places team within an organization. But people and places have always been the two biggest cost centers. And where we're trying to get in the future is stop looking at them as cost centers, but rather as growth generators, because the people and the places are also the most nourishing elements of a successful company. So once we merge these two and we understand that people is your biggest asset, and the experience that they're going to live on the virtual or the physical workplace is going to influence the quality of their work, the quality of their engagement, their motivation, then companies will be really like transition to that fusion and empower the leaders in this group to design amazing experiences for employees.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, and that's sort of dawning on more and more companies, that your product is not your differentiator. That's not your competitive edge. It's your people, because your product will get old and other companies will catch up. But it's your people that will help you stay relevant and innovate, right? So you have to provide the conditions to do that.
Exactly. And something new that companies are trying to grapple with is that your best ambassadors are your customers, but more even so your employees. And when you have tens of thousands of employees, they're going to be your strongest ambassadors or your worst enemies if they're having a bad experience. And so it's really important that employee experience is well designed, the same way that we design this customer experience, because they've been inside your organization, they know a lot about the company, and they can be the one who can make a difference in the conversation.
And as you say, also the alumni can be a really powerful asset. Exactly. That many companies sort of tend to forget. Okay, but because I think this is where many companies right now are struggling, like how do you create a great employee experience for people who are remote? I mean, let's say you have a beautiful, wonderful office with a lot of, creativity brewing, and then you have all the people who are distributed. And how do you make everyone feel as a whole, and how do you make everyone feel like they belong?
So that's a very good question. And it's interesting because about a few months ago, I had an aha moment on that question, because I come from designing workplaces. I thought that designing workplaces were the way to create this amazing employee experience. And with the pandemic, I started being seen as a remote leader and remote advocate. And I was like, how do I connect these two concepts? Because I'm supposed to design workplaces, but at the same time, I'm promoting work from anywhere flexibility. So what's the bridge between them? And for me, the way I was able to reconcile these two ideas is that I don't think that the future will be in a way that people will be at home and only connect to virtual offices. People are people, and they have neighbors, and they have coffee shops, and they have their favorite flower shop, and they go out in the street, and they're always willing to meet people. So the future is not that work should only belong in the home. If it doesn't belong in the home, we still need to design other places. So we could decide that co-working spaces are doing a good job. So as an employer, we don't need to design offices. Or if we think that co-working spaces are great, but they're not curated for our brand, they're not curated around our mission, then we ought to design our own spaces. That's one way I reconcile. So the future is not just going to be in the home, it's going to be in other places, and employers have the power to create the space. The second element to reconcile these two concepts is that I believe that if people are having a traumatic remote experience or a very challenging one, they're feeling like they're being micromanaged or even that they're being spied. We heard like very terrible stories. There is no chance they will ever leave their home and want to meet their coworkers in the office. Ever. That's never going to happen. If you are having a very difficult relationship with your manager, with your colleague, because the remote experience is not well designed, you will never on your own will leave your home to meet them in an office. Mm-hmm. So actually, we need to design an amazing remote experience if we want to bring people back to the office. And it's only when we'll have this amazing experience in remote that people will find their own rhythm. What it is that I like doing in the virtual workplace, what it is that I like doing in person. And you don't have to mandate it. None of us have been given a playbook on when we should shop online and when we should shop in the office. None of us have been given a playbook on what we should watch on Netflix at our home and what we should watch in the theater. We all find our rhythm. We should trust that it's going to be the same in the office. People will find out what they want to do in the virtual, what they want to do in the physical.
I'm having open here an article you wrote, I think, for Density, and with 10 predictions for the future of work.
Yeah.
And you wrote that offices in the future will be a mix of the best restaurants, the most inspiring learning campuses, the most engaging community hubs, and the most serene retreat centers. That really spoke to me. I love that. Is that something you want to elaborate a little bit more on? Do you think this is like, because it does sound very like Silicon Valley, you know, and I can imagine a lot of company leaders saying, yeah, right, you know, especially if you have a smaller company and limited budgets and, you know, your mind is just, you know, geared towards
Exactly. And you brought up a very interesting point, is that each company at different stage of maturity should define an original employee experience. You cannot copy a Google when you have 10 employees. And even if you have as many people as Google and you Facebook or Amazon, your experience should be curated because of the originality of your brand, of your mission, and of your audience. So each company should try to design something that is authentic to them. Obviously, you can get inspired by others. What I wanted to say with this catchy prediction is that there's going to be 4 elements that are very important to every employee in the virtual and in the digital workplace. The first one is community. Today, we are lucky to live in a world where we can work for any company almost from anywhere in the world. So people will stick for the mission, they will stick for their manager, they will stick for the community. Unfortunately, if they don't feel like they're a member of the community, even these two won't be strong enough to keep them. So it's very important that companies turn their hubs, virtual and physical, into a community center. And WeWork had understood it already 10 years ago. And they were able to attract freelancers and solo entrepreneurs who had nothing in common and nothing to do with each other to a space because they were looking for a community. So now that's what companies need to do. The second one is well-being. I think the pandemic has put in the front of our eyes that if you're not healthy, you cannot deliver on your work. And if you're not healthy, and you try to work through a burnout, through exhaustion, through maybe illness, your work wouldn't be worth your time. You'd better take time off and heal and come back. So there's a strong emphasis on well-being. Companies for the last 5 years have given a lot of emphasis on having a fitness club or a gym, or given allowances to their employees to go to the yoga studio or whatever they need. This is a trend that is going to continue increasing. A lot more companies are going to ever offer allowances to employees to use outside of the work environment, or bring this experience inside as a way to attract people in again. So those are the two elements. And the last two one is very, they're looking at how do we bring intentionality. When you can work from home, what is it that you're going to do in person? Is it work or is it sharing presence with each other, looking into each other's eyes, building relationship? That's something that we're not doing enough before. We could like spend 8 hours in the office, 8 hours in meetings, and feeling like our relationship were very superficial. That's why we want to bring more engaging and intentional workplaces to allow people to bond, because it goes back to the first point. You'll stick around because you have friends. And that has been very amazing to see recently, that in most survey employees, we've identified this pattern, and that was something that they shared recently at Facebook also, that people would say that their number one factor of retention is whether they have a friend in the company or not. Right. And then the last element is really how people connect with the brand, because as we mentioned earlier, they're gonna be your best brand ambassadors. So those are the 4 elements that should be incorporated, either both in physical and virtual, or in a healthy mix of both, when people know where to find each element in one or other of the workplace.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail there, because, and I think, don't you think that when companies realize that these things are very, very closely tied to actual numbers, on the bottom line, retention. If you have a friend, you stick around. So exactly. How can we enable friendships? Exactly. But I wonder how many HR teams has that on their agenda? Like, how do we enable friendships at work? I don't know. Something to think about for sure.
That's very much why technology is playing a big role in this future of work. And without this data, we won't be able to overcome the challenges of creating a hybrid model. So now it's even more so critical that we realize that data is bringing power to leaders. And when leaders become more fluent in reading this data and understanding the insight, they can design a more authentic experience. And the second element is that data is always showing us our blind spots. Even though we thought we were doing good, the studies today reveal that women would rather continue working from home because there was a lot of harassment and sexual aggression happening in the workplace, that a lot of minorities would rather continue working from home because they never felt that they could bring their best self to the workplace. They had to actually blend in or remove their differences. So today the blind spots are in the spotlight, and we cannot continue saying like, oh, but we're doing fine before. No, a lot of people were not having this amazing employee experience. And so it's time that we design for diversity, for inclusion, and for belonging.
Could you give some examples of the data you're working with? What kinds of data you're talking about?
So it's a very, as we talked about before, there's this fusion of HR and workplace teams. We need to get to a point where we have about the same fusion between HR data and workplace data. For now, these two technology buckets are working removed from each other. And so the strain is on leaders. Leaders are trying to compile these different data to bring a picture. I'm really hoping for a near future where we can bring those two data together. So one example is with our density data, it's really amazing that because we can tell employers how many people are coming in the office, when are they visiting. We can combine this with whatever activities or events were happening in the office and show them what is successful, what is less successful. We can show them what are the corners that attract people, so they get a picture of, oh, in this office in New York, I realized that a lot more people come for socializing. They rarely sit at their desk, or they really come to the quiet corner because maybe they already built for themselves a quiet place at home. Once you have that data, you understand that there is a possibility for you to reinvent maybe the quiet corner and change it into something that will be more valued to employees. That's the bridge that a lot of leaders have to make, is like, if I were to include homes inside my portfolio, what would I decide to creating the homes, what would I create in these collective spaces? That's something that, again, we're not doing before the pandemic. And when we look at the unused space in our workplaces, which was about 60% of workplaces were unused before the pandemic, if we were to account for homes, they were 100% unoccupied because people were coming to the workplace. So we have to be smarter in the way we utilize all spaces, because we all have an invested interest in making sure our planet can support our growth. And so this technology who can tell you who was coming and what kind of people and who is going to be your audience in the future, what kind of employees you're going to attract, should be aiming to also make sure we use what we have before we continue building, because at some point we'll get to a dead end of what we can continue building in this planet.
Yeah, that sustainability perspective is also super interesting when it comes to collecting workplace data. If you would choose your favorite sort of trends or predictions, like what do you see that is happening that's like really new and out there and like really inspiring? Because I'm sure you know a lot.
I definitely have one example that I've been cherishing, but I've been very inspired by Spotify. Throughout the pandemic, they've been very innovative. They decided to disrupt what was ever possible. They were some of the first ones to engage into work from anywhere, knowing that they will encounter challenges with tax and legal aspect, but they were like, okay, we know we're gonna make it, so we're gonna break this old traditional system and find a way around it. Their last example is, for me, the apotheose of the future of work, in the sense that they're really bringing community and authenticity together. So recently they announced that they're going to open pop-up destination for their employees. And I find it really inspiring, because if we're honest, now we know that a lot of people have embarked on a digital nomad lifestyle. And so as digital nomad, they can be anywhere at any given time, but they're also looking for community. By bringing employees together in an amazing place for a few months, you allow people to build relationships and make friends. You allow people to live in a curated environment that is designed for community, not just for individuals, but for community. And you allow them to really integrate their life and their work. And that's something that is very new. And I think the millennials and the Gen Z are even more so sensitive to it. But I think it's long gone the days where work was work and life was happening after work. It's not enough. This is not what we want. We want that our work is serving our life purpose, and that our life is imbued in our work, because if we have a doctor's appointment, or if our kid is here, we don't want to call a manager and say, oh, I'm sorry, can I take a day off? Now, obviously, I'm going to take a day off. My kid is ill. So we're really trying to move away from this separation of work and life and integrate them together. I think this experience that Spotify is going to offer to their employees is an experience, but is really aiming to allow people to find the self-discipline to know when to work, when to socialize, when to disconnect, and to integrate life and work together and be part of a community. And I find it very inspiring.
It's super inspiring. And I really like what you said about that we need the purpose for what we're doing. We're not just going to sit and take directions. But I think this new way of working, and it also puts a new set of sort of, not demands, but maybe challenges for the individual, or you will be required to self-lead in a new way, maybe.
Exactly.
Is that something the workplace can also, like the physical workplace or digital workplace can enable and support, do you think?
That's a very interesting question. And something that we don't talk enough about. Like reading in the headlines and we're hearing from employers that they're very scared about the future of work. But actually employees have the same fear. Like, do I know when to disconnect? Do I know to put boundaries? Do I know how to own my calendar and define times? Because what we've seen during the beginning of the pandemic is that a lot of people were going to burn out. Because there was just nothing else to do. So they were working. And so supposedly the productivity just got to rise up. But it was just because people were working more hours. So actually, we are all learning in this journey. It's not just that employees have figured it all out and employees need to get on the page. Like, we are learning together, but employers who are owning the framework are influencing for the positive or for the negative. And so definitely my role and leaders in the Future of Work movement, we are helping employers to create movement and to create framework that would allow employees to find out what's their rhythm. GitLab is an amazing example. As part of their training on creating a remote first company, they have an entire portion on how to help individuals become self-disciplined and find their individual rhythm. And that's so important. And so that's a journey that we all need to take together. I think maybe to end on a note, we could look at optimism. I think there is a very striking element that attracted me to leaders in the space, and that's the leaders that I invited to my podcast, is that those people who are aiming to build the future are very optimistic. And people who are actually resisting the change are most often pessimistic. Where lies the difference? The difference is that in the action. If you every day strive to work a better future, you know it's going to happen because you're putting so much of yourself, you're putting so much effort, and you're finding a tribe of other people who are doing the same. So I want to tell the audience that very much we need to be in action because time is passing, people are quitting, and we're seeing this great resignation happening when there's no action, there's no communication. And so I would encourage every company to try out and start somewhere. Hire someone with a title that can give a signal that you're working on it. Communicate with your employees. Making experiments. Everybody's experimenting. Open communication channels so you can get some feedback loop from your employees if you have zero idea of where to start. But know that if you speak with an open heart and with a positive mindset, you're going to be part of the shapers of the future of work, and you're going to own what it looks like in the future. If you just wait, then you can only be subject to the change that other people are making and feeling like you don't own it, you don't control it. So that's where I would like to end, because there's millions of employees who are suffering through the lack of communication, the lack of action, the lack of support from their employers. And we can just look at the great resignation. We can also look at the burden of people who are living with mental issues or psychological and emotional issues, and that's unfortunately that's hurting all of us as a society.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Nellie Hayat. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It was a pleasure to be with you.